The cafe was quiet, a haven for whispered conversations and stolen moments. Emma sat near the window, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her coffee cup. The soft light streaming through the glass illuminated her face, highlighting the faint lines of worry etched into her brow. She was dressed impeccably, as always, sharp navy blazer, hair neatly swept back, but there was a weariness in her eyes that no amount of polish could disguise. Across from her sat Alex, a man whose ease seemed to contrast sharply with her tension. He was younger than her, mid-30s perhaps, with a slight smile that hovered between charm and mischief. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms that Emma's gaze lingered on longer than she should have allowed. He leaned forward, his dark eyes intent on her, as if the outside world had ceased to exist. "Are you sure you're okay with all of this?" Alex's voice was low, measured. Emma hesitated. The question wasn't about the project they'd been working on, not entirely. Their department's recent merger had thrown them together more often than her marriage felt comfortable allowing. Yet here they were, meeting after hours, ostensibly to finalize a proposal. "It's fine," she said finally, her tone brisk, her words a shield. "It's just work." But even as she spoke, she felt the lie hang in the air between them. It wasn't just work. It hadn't been for weeks, though neither of them had dared to acknowledge it aloud. Alex smiled faintly, leaning back in his chair. "If you say so, but you seem distracted." "I hope it's not me." Emma's lips parted to respond, but nothing came. Was it him? She wasn't sure anymore. It had started innocently enough. A shared laugh over office politics, his uncanny ability to finish her sentences during meetings. But lately, she had begun to anticipate these moments with him, the rush of adrenaline that came with their unspoken connection. She glanced down, adjusting her wedding ring as though its weight might anchor her to something solid. "I'm just tired," she murmured. "Of work?" he asked, his gaze steady. "Or something else?" The words hit her like a challenge, his curiosity cutting through her carefully constructed defenses. Emma's breath caught. It would have been so easy to brush him off, to make an excuse, to change the subject. But the intensity in his eyes dared her to be honest, if only for a second. "Both," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Alex nodded slowly, as though he'd known her answer all along. The silence between them stretched, thick with possibilities, until he spoke again. "Maybe you just need a change of scenery," he said, a subtle invitation lurking beneath the casual suggestion. Emma felt her heart race, and for a moment, she hated how much she wanted to say yes. But instead, she rose, gathering her bag. "Let's stick to the project," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. As she walked toward the door, she sensed his eyes following her, a question left unanswered. The cafe door closed behind her, but the tension stayed, humming in her chest. The apartment was quiet, the air heavy with a tension that neither of them dared to address. Emma stood just inside the door, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor as she took in her surroundings. Alex's space was as she imagined it might be, minimalist and tidy, with a subtle warmth in the earthy tones of the furniture. A faint trace of his cologne lingered in the air, stirring something deep within her. Alex placed his bag on the counter and turned to her, his movements unhurried but deliberate. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, his voice low and inviting. Emma hesitated, clutching her purse tightly. She knew she shouldn't have come. After leaving the cafe, she told herself a dozen reasons to go straight home. But Alex's suggestion of finishing their work at his apartment had lingered, an offer wrapped in ambiguity that she couldn't resist. "I won't stay long," she said finally, setting her purse down and stepping further inside. "Of course." Alex's tone was casual, but his gaze betrayed something deeper. They sat at the small dining table, papers spread between them, though neither seemed particularly interested in the task at hand. Alex leaned closer, his arm brushing hers as he pointed to a figure on one of the documents. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a spark racing up her spine. Emma inhaled sharply, her focus slipping. "Emma," Alex said, his voice softer now. She looked up, meeting his eyes. The way he said her name felt intimate, as though it carried a weight she hadn't noticed before. Her pulse quickened. "Yes, I've been thinking about something," he said, leaning back in his chair. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between curiosity and caution. "About us?" Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Alex, I know," he interrupted gently, raising a hand. "This isn't appropriate. I get that, but I can't pretend there's nothing here." His honesty hung in the air, uncomfortably raw. Emma glanced at her wedding ring, the cool metal suddenly feeling heavier against her skin. She wanted to deny it, to dismiss whatever was blooming between them as a passing fancy. But deep down, she knew better. "This isn't right," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I know," he repeated, his eyes never leaving hers. "But sometimes the right thing and the real thing aren't the same." Before she could respond, Alex reached for her hand, his touch tentative, as if giving her a chance to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she let her fingers curl around his, the connection sending a wave of heat through her. Time seemed to stop as Alex leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek. When their lips met, the kiss was soft but electric, a collision of guilt and longing. Emma pulled back abruptly, her chest heaving. "I should go," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Alex searched her face, his own expression unreadable. "Do you want to?" She hesitated, caught in the gravity of the moment. The answer was simple, but saying it aloud would change everything. Her silence was all the answer he needed. The room was dark now, illuminated only by the soft glow of a lamp in the corner. Emma sat on the edge of the couch, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel Alex behind her, his presence magnetic, his closeness overwhelming. The air between them felt charged, as though something irreversible had already been set in motion. She turned to him, her thoughts a whirlwind of desire and guilt. "This shouldn't have happened," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Alex tilted his head, studying her, his gaze steady and unyielding. "Maybe not," he replied, his tone calm. "But it did." He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she let him take her hand, their connection both terrifying and exhilarating. His touch was gentle, unhurried, as though he understood the storm raging inside her and didn't want to force her to speak it aloud. "Emma," he said softly, "I don't want to hurt you, or anyone else, but I can't ignore this, whatever it is between us." She looked down at their intertwined hands, her wedding ring glinting in the dim light. Her mind screamed at her to stop, to leave, to salvage what was left of her integrity. But her body betrayed her, leaning toward him, drawn by a force she couldn't name. "It's not that simple," she said finally, her voice trembling. "Nothing worth it ever is." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Alex leaned closer, his face inches from hers. This time, she didn't resist. Their lips met again, but this kiss was different. It wasn't tentative or questioning. It was consuming, a release of everything they'd been holding back. Emma felt herself surrendering, her thoughts dissolving into the moment. She let him pull her closer, his arms wrapping around her, as if to shield her from the consequences waiting on the other side of this night. His touch was firm yet tender, his hands tracing a path along her back that sent shivers coursing through her. She hadn't felt this alive in years. With Alex, she felt seen, desired, understood. Every touch, every kiss felt like a reclamation of the woman she'd forgotten she was. But as the intensity grew, so did the weight of what they were doing. Somewhere in the haze of passion, the reality of her life began to seep back in. She thought of Daniel, of their home, their quiet routines, his distracted affection. The contrast between the two men felt like a chasm, one she wasn't sure she could bridge. As they lay together, silence settling over them. Alex's hand traced absent patterns on her arm. "You deserve to be happy," he said softly, his words a bomb and a wound all at once. Emma stared at the ceiling, her thoughts tangled. Happiness, she realized, wasn't the absence of guilt. It was the presence of something she couldn't yet define. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, the name on the screen piercing through the intimacy like a knife. Daniel. Emma sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel as the engine idled. The streets were quiet, bathed in the amber glow of streetlights, but her mind was anything but still. The memory of Alex's touch lingered on her skin, as vivid and intoxicating as the moment itself. Yet her phone buzzed incessantly on the passenger seat, Daniel's name lighting up the screen like an accusation she couldn't ignore. She exhaled sharply and silenced the call. Driving home felt like walking into a trap of her own making, yet avoiding it wasn't an option. There was nowhere else to go. The house was dark when she arrived, its silence unnervingly still. She closed the door softly behind her, the familiar scent of lavender and wood polish enveloping her like a cruel reminder of the life she'd built. Daniel was in the living room, his laptop perched on his knees, a half-empty glass of whiskey on the table beside him. He looked up at her, his expression tired but warm. "You're late," he said, his voice neutral. "Work ran over," Emma replied, her tone measured, practiced. Daniel nodded, his attention drifting back to the screen. The mundanity of his reaction stung more than she expected, as though her absence hadn't been worth questioning. She stood there for a moment, the weight of her evening pressing against her chest. "I'm going to bed," she said softly. "Okay, I'll be up in a bit." Upstairs, the bedroom felt cold, the sheets neatly tucked on the bed they shared. Emma sank onto the edge, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her face betrayed nothing of the turmoil beneath the surface. She removed her wedding ring and placed it on the nightstand, watching it glint in the dim light. The image of Alex flashed in her mind. The way he had looked at her, touched her, made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. She thought about the way he'd said her name, as though it held meaning beyond the syllables. Yet, the guilt of leaving Daniel downstairs gnawed at her, an ache she couldn't shake. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Alex. "Thinking of you," the text read. Her thumb hovered over the screen, torn between replying and deleting it. The pull toward him was undeniable, but it was tethered to a truth she couldn't escape. This wasn't sustainable. What had felt like a moment of liberation now seemed like a chain, binding her to choices she wasn't ready to face. Emma set the phone down without replying. She lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling as doubt and longing warred within her. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure who she was or what she wanted. Downstairs, she could hear Daniel's footsteps heading toward the bedroom. The door creaked open, and she shut her eyes, bracing herself for the weight of her double life. The story ends with Emma lying in the darkness, caught between the life she knows and the one she desires, the silence heavy with unanswered questions.